Welcome to the Digital Transformist. I'm Mike LaVista. Today on the podcast, we have Loic Potjes from Disruptive Leap. He is a CEO coach right now, but has had an adventure through a number of different companies as a CEO and growth expert. Has a lot of interesting things today. We talk a lot about 80-20 rule. We talk about change management. We talk about AI and ways to implement it in your company and grow. Really, really good conversation. Let's jump right in. Hello and welcome to the Digital Transformers. I'm Mike LaVista, and today we have Loic Potjes coming to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Really interesting journey he's had through both corporate leadership and helping companies grow and exit, and now he's got a new company that's focused on executive coaching and helping companies do a lot of the things that we talk about here on the podcast a lot, including AI readiness and scaling and lots of other interesting topics. So I thought, look, if we could start with maybe let's get people educated on your background and kind of your journey to where you are today with your company now.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for having me. Great to be here. So I'm originally from Belgium, from Brussels, Europe, French speaking from home, went into boarding school in Flemish and then studied business. And at 23 years old, I thought it's time to go and save the world. And I went off to Africa for 2 years of non-for-profit to think how can I do a little difference. And great, I was thrown at deep end working with 30 different cultures, the head of finance for the Catholic Church in Zambia, overseeing a large network of missions, Catholic schools and clinics and hospitals. And so we managed to kind of put some structure and over 2 years, great exposure, lots of learnings at a tender age, came back and started working for multinationals in Europe. And very quickly, not by design, but by default, I started working on the 80-20, naturally, on that Pareto. So getting into anything big, bold, and ugly, a new company that needed to be integrated, a recent acquisition, a scale-up, implementing tech, turning around a business. And I would naturally get in there, find the root causes, understand problem solving, put a team in place, get the heavy lifting done. But I would naturally get disinterested from the refinement and crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And so learned a lot over a few years, moved from company to company and division to division, did an exec MBA, got married. And after 1 year of marriage, when Caroline had put the last curtains on our home in Brussels, I came back home saying, hey, we're the happy winners of a one-way ticket to South Africa. And at the time, a Swedish multinational, Securitas, was looking for young expatriate CEOs to go and start building businesses in emerging markets. So we got South Africa, arrived here with my little laptop on the main square in Johannesburg, called the global CEO saying, hey, what's the plan? And he said, what do you mean, what's the plan? Just build a business. I said, okay. And I bought a first company, a small one with 200 employees, and that gave me a quick start of operations with a bit of a management team, operating licenses. And then from there, we doubled. It was a growth madness. We doubled the size of the business every single year, 6 years in a row, organically, through a very unique, like premium positioning, and then inorganically with further acquisitions. And we ended up with 4,000 people, a well-established corporate group, and so on. So lots of learnings on what to do and especially not to do in scaling fast. And then the market turned, and we had to, essentially the market price became below the minimum wage, and the wage bill was 80% of our cost base. And so largely it had gone to an illegal market. So we had to reinvent ourselves or die. So a bit of a watershed moment. And I understood we needed to do something significantly different. Otherwise, we would not survive the market rational at that time. So started toying around with tech, and it was the beginning of AI at the time and of behavioral pattern recognition. And so, which is now a bit more of a commodity, but at the time it was fancy, it was new, it was the shiny new thing. And we started getting all the client enthused around, wow, have you seen this tech? And we got 100% of the clients absolutely thrilled about the tech, but no one would buy. And we
Mm.
thought, what have we gotten wrong? And we had to quickly learn the value of USP, go to market step by step, productizing, pricing packages, and all of those fine things. But still, it was taking too long to move a traditional, very operational company into something substantially more agile, more quick to think on its feet and scale. And so I spotted a small company, an SME with 50 employees who had just gotten everything right. So the mindset, the USP, the processes, it was absolutely great. So I bought them, and with buying them, I bought 2 years of school fees, which I bought time essentially. And instead of the large corporation swallowing with the best of intention, the SME, the new tech, I did the opposite. So I brought the four founders on my exco, and we started revolutionizing internally. Did an awful lot of things wrong, and I had to learn super quickly. But eventually, we quadrupled the EBIT of the group of companies, and from the new high margin tech leasing came 80% of the profit margin, and also the sustainability of the thousands of people we were employing at the time. So
Mhm.
we salvaged the company. From there, first midlife crisis, I thought, is there life beyond corporate CEO, which I had been doing like for about 10 years at the time. And I thought, what else can I learn? And I went into and created a boutique advisory firm to help companies scaling exponentially. Not using so much of very theoretical models, but more from the do's and don'ts and the practical learnings. So I helped a few companies. Then I invested in tech. I led for a VC, a SaaS company on ESG. I exited that last year in Feb. Had my what I call my second midlife crisis. Had coffee with a friend in Paris who said, "Hey, I'm doing CEO coaching. It's awesome." And cut a long story short, this is what I'm doing now, and it brings for me the love of scaling and working on businesses, not in with all the
Mhm.
day to day. It brings mentoring, which I've done my whole life, bring teams together and scale themselves. And it brings, so I'm coaching people between Hong Kong, India, Africa, Europe, London, Miami, New York, Florida, San Francisco, Latin America. So it's literally an array of industries. And we're trying to see how CEO coaching, that space
Mm.
of perspective, that space of working on the business, that space of an experienced peer that you can talk to, but bringing AI in that fold to try to scale ourselves and the space and the value we can get from it. So I'll tell you more next time about the third midlife crisis whenever that comes. But
That's
for
good,
now,
right?
living the life and enjoying what I do.
Well, let's hear about like, what you were just talking about. I'm interested in the 80/20 rule as well. And I wondered if we could combine a couple of ideas there. And if you were to say, what were the best couple of ideas from scaling things to do and scaling things not to do that you learned in that growth exercise? What were some things you'd share with companies listening to this podcast?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of pieces of puzzle that have to fall in line for extraordinary growth and scaling. And because what 90+% of companies end up doing is more of the same and expecting different results, which is the definition of insanity from Einstein. And we always think next year is going to be a great year, but essentially nothing has changed fundamentally in what we do. We're still stuck with the same approach to market. And so essentially, the first thing that needs to be absolutely clear is the North Star. What is the goal 5 or 10 years from now? Is it about generating multi-generational wealth? Is it about being $1 billion business? Is it about a listing on the New York Stock Exchange or London or wherever? What is it about? Is it impact? So, and that needs to be quantified very precisely. And then it needs to be the second piece of puzzle is we need a reverse engineered plan. So if I'm, for example, 100 million euro or US of annual revenue right now, and I need to be a billion in 5 years, then I can't think linearly anymore because the gap is just too big between the
Yeah.
more of the same and to get there. And so what are the scaling levers? Is it M&A? Is it new markets, new products? Is it a new high margin? And then once that's clear, what engine do I need in the room? Number three. So first, the North Star, two, the plan to get there. And it cannot be a linear plan, a
Mhm.
business as usual plan with a twist. Three, it's got to be who's got the engine in the room, like my core team. They were fit for purpose for the current business. But what kind of skill sets, and that gap is often where it all fails. And the fourth thing is to be absolutely clear, therefore, in my agenda as a CEO, in my schedule, does my schedule reflect the 80/20? If I got cast in stone for the next 100 years in recurrent meeting invites, blocked space to work on the 20% of things that will move the needle 80%.
Mm.
And so that is 95% of the time misaligned, and the CEO is a prisoner of and works passively 10, 12, 16 hours a day on the demands of the daily demands of, and that doesn't move the needle.
Mhm.
It gets them a great joy, as in a sense of being productive and busy and great in dopamine and all of that, but it does not move the needle. Um, and the
That's really
last thing
interesting because that's
is
such a practical piece of advice to not let your calendar be your your taskmaster. Because as you were saying that, I'm thinking about, does my calendar reflect an 80/20 mindset? And it definitely does not. And in fact, I wonder if a lot of other CEOs find themselves um, during the day handling all the 80% things, and then trying to fit in 20% around mornings, weekends, late nights, other times to try to move the needle. That's actually a really interesting mindset. Has that been how, when CEOs hear that, does the light bulb go on immediately, or how difficult a change is that? Do you think for CEOs to make that mindset switch?
so first they work and they try to then they think it's a problem of time management, and then they try to rearrange their schedule. But if you're not clear and crystal clear about the 4 or 5 things that will move the needle towards your North Star. If your North
Mhm.
Star or the way to get there isn't clear, then there's no way your calendar is going to reflect anything more than a slight rearrangement, and life will get the better of your schedule once again. So
Mhm.
it has to be about following those steps, I think. And the last thing is a space of accountability. And if you're at the helm of your company as a CEO, besides just because, to be frank and brutally honest, most boards are ineffective. Potentially, a number of the guys don't even read the board packs before pitching and so boards are usually not that great of a tool of accountability for the CEO. Besides when the numbers aren't right, and then they just apply more pressure. But as a co-thinking space, to as a peer space, to and that's what I love about CEO coaching.
Mhm.
And in terms of the North Star and getting there, that's what I love about. We have an extraordinary tool in AI, but we end up using it for meeting notes and action points, or to
Yeah.
craft a better email. So and we think we've done great. And yeah, that stuff doesn't move the needle, obviously.
It's funny. One of the things I like to think a lot about with AI is you mentioned 10x a number of times here, and there's an idea that I really like that, sometimes when you think about, doing 2x, the idea is just we'll just work a little harder. We'll do what we're already doing, as you said earlier. We'll do what we're already doing a little bit more. Whereas 10x, it has to mean I'm doing something differently. We're doing something more exponential. And when I think about AI, the same thing comes to mind. I think a lot of the examples we see companies working on are very mundane. They're very just, well, we're going to take what we've already done and make it a little bit better with AI, or we're going to, our workforce or workflow might become a little bit different, as opposed to, let's come up with a radically new way of doing things so that we can reach our North Star in 10x. Does that fit kind of the types of strategies you've been thinking about?
Mike, it's completely spot on. So 95% of companies want to be, there's that fancy terms called AI readiness, and they want to know if their company is AI ready. No, that's absolutely awesome for consultants. They make a fortune, but it doesn't help much to companies. And the next thing is, to your point, because we crave, we hate risk as human being, we hate change, and we end up using the tech to work internally on some efficiencies. Can I get 1% EBIT more or collections and of receivables by automating that process? And I'm saying all of that is useful, but it does not move your business 10x. You've got to work on the frontier, you've got to work out there, and you've got to interrogate. And so there's a bit of a dance in it's the for AI, it's the art of the prompt of asking the right questions, and it's the art of surfing AI and understanding between Claude or Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever platforms and tools which evolves daily. It's who in your organization or outside the organization is on top of where to ask and surfing those platforms, and who is best placed to help you ask the right questions. So as in, one thing we do is not an AI readiness workshop, but we're asking a CEO before onboarding them on coaching. We're saying, okay, give me a bit of a diagnostic. What's your USP? What makes you different than your
Mhm.
competitors? What's your strategy essentially? And how are you doing at it? And so we get that duly a couple of,
Yeah.
two A4 pages, literally. And then we put that carefully aside and we ask on that company, what is their strategy, what are their gaps, what are their differentiators, and so on and so forth. And there's an art to asking that, and then the AI tool scrapes the internet on their direct competitors, then starts thinking on itself, asks for feedback. And that's where you could say, no, the legislation is slightly different in Brazil, you can't do that, or in the US you've got that framework too.
Mm.
And so it's the art of dancing together until then the AI starts thinking on itself and generates new categories of spaces we should be in,
Mhm.
and competitors we never knew we had. Like if someone had thought, okay, I'm competing against Netflix, but Netflix isn't competing against you. Netflix is competing against sleep. And the biggest enemy is sleep. They want you to watch that additional what's it called, the next
Next
series, and so
episode.
on and
Yeah.
so
Right.
forth, the next episode. And so it's extraordinary what AI can do in those kind of workshops. And then you bring it back into a 6 to 12 months actionable plan. And then with the CEO coaching space, you bring, because once you have a brilliant plan and you say, hey, Loic, or hey, Mike, here you go and implement, but your organization isn't ready. The mindset, the thinking, your core team is misaligned. You've got your
Yeah.
annual budget and you've got to deliver next quarter's results. Otherwise, you're going to have a profit warning on the NASDAQ or where you can't. So there's an accountability space. There's a molding the clay, which then we do in the CEO coaching space. And that interaction I found fascinating, between. But to answer you, definitely, it's not AI in terms of, because you can be 1% more efficient on your receivables, but it's not gonna save you from someone eating you for lunch with a radically new approach and so on. So yeah.
So, what are some of the ideas that you've had that came from out of the box that companies were able to implement? If those are something you can share, like I'm curious, like what are some of those 10x ideas to get people thinking about? Really just isn't about adjusting the knobs on your current dashboard. It's about coming up with a new dashboard and thinking about the business in a different and new way, entering a new market, etc.
Yeah, let's say in commodities pricing, huh? In commodities industry, so prices are volatile, and there's any cargo ship stuck in the Panama Canal or elsewhere, and all of a sudden the prices are going, and so we've had for such a company a tactical price window. So this is a mid-sized company, let's say a couple of $100 million, certainly not a multi-billion-dollar, and it felt, the CEO felt they were ill-equipped. They didn't have all the ERP, the fancy tools to then match the competitors. The AI came in with 5 practical strategies on what to do in to leverage the pricing ahead. And the question was, how can I generate more margins in the very short term, and how can I double my margin, whilst taking into account I'm not a multi-billion-dollar business and so on. And so one of them was, you can, after researching itself, said, okay, so your competitors update the pricing every 15 days. And so And so that's a tremendous window of opportunity because you can get to know when they update their pricing, and you can get to measure the arbitrage between
Mhm.
when they'll be updating their pricing or not. And therefore you can do specials, discounts, and then you can animate that, and you can get 5% more EBIT. And in the commodities pricing, and the AI could substantiate that with some calculations and so on and so forth. So that was an extraordinary insight, which they had never thought of.
Mm.
And so now, with that insight, AI could then, in a follow-up session, start coding, because then the CEO said, "Oh, geez, but we were 1 year away from that. We need deep SAP integration to have a pricing tool." Da, 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 da. And we said, "No, you don't have 2 years. What can you start by next Monday?" And we re-asked
Yeah.
AI to say, "Okay, by next Monday, what is implementable? What kind of code, what kind of tool could you come up with to have and to plug into some kind of API to the ERP?" Even if we are to export on Excel or CSV format, boom. So define it correctly, the art of the prompt, and it coded
Mm.
in 3 minutes something that was almost ready to copy paste with some manual intervention. But the point was, the next Monday they could start
Right.
and generating EBIT. So that was extraordinary. And so there are a number of examples like that.
That's really interesting. So it's funny, where you were said a minute ago something that I agree with as well, which is, the AI readiness boom. In a way, like, every company, like, it's not really even a question. Every company needs to be AI ready, or in 5 or 10 years they'll be gone, in my opinion. And I think that the real thing that we've run into, I'm curious your thoughts about this, is I think the real challenge is, are they change ready? So there are some organizations that are able to absorb and adapt to change quickly, and others are not. And I'm really curious about your story from your most recent corporate days, where, as you said, you bought the smaller business and had the larger business adapt to their practices. And I have to imagine that was a pretty monumental change management act. And I'm just curious, like, how that went and what kind of advice you have about both that type of change, but even like this change relative to AI in a business.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a monumental change, and you've got it spot on once again, Mike. So it's not about the tech. The tech can do many things. It can't do everything, but it will, or at least many things. And so it's about our inertia, or reluctance to change, or lack of risk appetite, and or the slow pace at which we respond, and even more so, large organizations fail to respond when is the time, and that's probably the worst thing, or the biggest challenge. And so what comes to mind is, so first, I could affect the change because I was the CEO at the time, and I could then therefore say, well, we're going left or we're going right. And so that's so the it's not even support or buy-in from the top. It's got to be led from the top, and by the CEO. And that's the first criteria. The second one is to be realistic. So realistic about, it's like, I came up with a tool at the time, which was the future proof brains, as in, to spot within the organizations the people who are naturally, or the early adopters, people who naturally love change, and so they're far and few in between. But actually, it's only a few personality traits.
Hmm.
It's openness to change. It's the go-getters, the guys finding the solutions naturally, the problem solvers, and if you can map a good old personality test to that, you can identify who are the agents of change. And then there's something about burning the ships.
Hmm.
There was
Absolutely.
that story of a Greek general going to attack a city, and they disembarked the ships. They're in front of that formidable city, and now the army is in two minds. And what did the general do? Burn the ships, coming back to the troops, saying, "Well, what are the options now? Well, we better take that city." And so I remember that in scaling, we were largely going passively to responding to larger tenders, RFQs, and so on and so forth, and with an extremely low closing rate, a crap margin, and so it wasn't. It was a commodity place, and preaching to the sales team and the amount of training and efforts and commission, rewarding, bonus schemes, or none of that would matter. People wouldn't change until I burned the ship. And overnight, I said the next person. So it's formally forbidden to respond to any tender in this company, and the next
Mm.
person doing so will face disciplinary. And I explained why, and I explained so, and until I had burned the ships and let go of a couple of people saying, well, I was clear, and now people could see that action was
Yeah.
following, and now they said, well, he actually means it, and then people are forced into the and one needs to be careful of that tipping point because you can't just destroy your current business. So you've got to
Mhm.
be sensitive about when you do that, but meaningful action, not to be stuck in between the new and the old, and is also key.
That's really great. It's funny if you saw me nodding, but when you mentioned the Greek burning the ships, I feel like probably five of the last 10 interviews I've done, we've brought up that idea because there really is a mindset around we're really going forward with this change. Like there's no going back. And I think there's a natural tendency. One of the things we found a lot in our work as we develop, solutions is that a new solution comes on board and people go back to even if the old system has been taken down, they go back to spreadsheets they used to use and old ways of doing things because they're just so comfortable. And in many times, and we work in a lot of businesses in the sort of the industrial space that have been around for a long time. So they might have been doing something for a decade, sometimes 2 decades, sometimes longer. And that change is really, really hard. And I think you're spot on. We've got a similar personality test where if we can identify the people who can lead that change, it can't just be from the top down, or it's really hard for that to succeed long term. Short term, maybe, but long term, you need people who champion, like, hey guys, this is really better. Like, we need to be thinking differently, or like, you know, we're not going to be around, and as you said, if leadership is committed to this and the boats really are burned, we have to move forward. I think you're right. It's a delicate balance to get right. I'm curious, what other advice do you have for people about getting that tipping point correct? Because if you go too far one way or the other, it could be problematic.
I think even more important than that would be to understand who's not going to change and to know it up front.
Mm.
Because one of the extraordinary mistakes I did was dragging over calls forever people who hadn't in it in them to the skill set, the capacity to learn, to go through that change. People who had learned over decades about and become the expert and who could learn from experience, but we needed to now learn from a blank sheet of paper and a new space. And so dragging people over calls was an enormous mistake because I had a couple of people in burnout and so on, and people outside of their not only outside of the comfort zone but totally outside of the competence zone, and that's
Mm.
a grave mistake. So understanding early on who needs to be, and because not everything needs to change in the company, there's some parts, some processes, some part of the operations where we need people to keep the ship steady and on the rails. And for that, people who hate change or simply cannot change should be reinforced in those roles and
Mm.
appreciated and so on. It's not everything about the golden boys who are bringing the change. That was another mistake I did. Not to value and appreciate the guys keeping the oil tanker
Mm.
steady. And then it's to understand because people can change if you've got 15 years and lots of patience. But if you don't, then you need to bring in new blood and quickly. People
Yeah.
who don't have to de-learn before they need to relearn. People who come with an entirely new mindset. And my best actually learning was recruiting outside the industry, which I called unpolluted brains by
Mm.
decades of this is how it works in this industry. This is the sacrosanct ratio principle. That's how things are done in not only in this company, but in this industry. And bringing fresh blood from outside brings an extraordinary accelerator to the change as well.
I really like that because one of the things I was thinking about with change management is if someone's negative, you can't flip them to positive. You have to get them to at least neutral first, and that takes a lot of work. And I really like this idea of coming from outside the industry because they'll bring in there's certain management and other skills that are universal. And I think one of there's a positive benefit to knowing your industry and having a lot to say about how things work, but also there can be, especially when you're trying to change, and especially in our conversation around bringing in AI, I could see someone coming from another industry where they did something, they moved faster, and that lesson learned from, hey, this is how this worked when I was in textiles or something else. That's probably not a great example, but something from another industry where we saw something be successful. Sometimes people need to hear about a story of where it worked to believe, and I think belief and mindset like are a lot of the battle here.
Yeah, definitely. And in the new people you bring in, they have to be future wide brains to that test of go getters, problem solvers. They have to be absolutely quick to learn because you don't have 10 years for them to learn the industry, and they have to learn and be at speed super quickly. And then they have to be future change oriented. So that ability to puzzle things from different industries, but with new tools, and those conceptual abilities to puzzle things for new and trial out quickly and so on and again, all of that can be tested before you hire someone. And that actually bring the right guys on board and understanding how to leverage AI and having a clear North Star and a plan to get there. That is 80% of the success with the accountability space which comes from your board if you've got an efficient board, otherwise from externally a mentor, a coach, whoever that may be.
That's fantastic. Well, Loic, this has been a great conversation. As a final question here, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they feel like they'd like to reach out and hear more about your organization?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the easiest to get on our website, disruptiveleap.com. So disruptive like a disruption and a leap like a leap of faith. Disruptiveleap.com. And there you can pop a WhatsApp, an email, book a slot on my Calendly for a chat with absolute pleasure.
Well, look, again, it's been wonderful to have you. I'll make sure that link is in our description when we publish. And for everyone, if you like this content, please subscribe and you can hear about new episodes when they come out. This is Mike LaVista. Thanks for listening to The Digital Transformist. If you like this kind of content, subscribe and you can hear about new episodes when they come out.